If you're thinking about moving to Utah, you've probably asked one pretty important question. That is, how much does it actually cost to live here? Because Utah has changed a lot. Home prices have climbed, mortgage payments are higher than they used to be, rent isn't exactly cheap either, and then you still have groceries, utilities, transportation, childcare, and everything else that comes up in your normal life, right? But instead of throwing a bunch of confusing statistics at you, I really want to try and make this simple. I've been doing a lot of research over the past couple weeks on the cost of living here in Utah, and everything I get is just numbers, statistics, all these things, and I look at it and I'm like, how do I understand this? I have no idea. So I've really kind of tried to break it down to make it a lot simpler to understand. So in this episode, we're going to look over 5 topics, nice and easy. How expensive are homes here in Utah? Why the monthly payments are so high? Whether renting can actually be cheaper? Some of the everyday expenses people don't think about, and also how much of your location inside Utah can change the numbers. So a little bit of everything there. It's kind of fun. At the very end, stick around because we're going to put this into a real life scenario between 3 different people. We're going to look at a single person renting an apartment, a young married couple buying their first townhome, and a young family buying a single family home, and kind of go from there to see what living in Utah might actually cost each of them every month. So, is Utah still affordable in 2026? Let's find out. All right, so before we jump into today's episode, I just want to let you know that it is brought to you by Home EXP, which I'll do a little picture here on the camera, or on the video, I guess, because I am not currently wearing anything EXP. I'm wearing water polo stuff today and my cool Utah headband. So, Home EXP. If you're thinking about moving to Utah, buying your first home, maybe selling one, and also going from there to buying a new one, downsizing or upsizing, or just selling a home, maybe you're looking at investing, that's exactly what we are here to help out with. We help people with it every single day, every week, and we're here to do what we can to assist you. At Home, the goal isn't just trying to open doors and write contracts. We want to help you understand the market, know what your options are, and make a move that actually makes sense for your life and your budget. So, if this episode brings up any questions about what you can afford, where you might want to live, or what buying a home in Utah could look like for you, you can find us at homutah.com. Once again, that is homutah.com. It's not hom, it's home. Your home here in Utah. All right, with that, let's kind of get over this. What makes it most expensive for Utah? We've got our first topic. Like I said, we're going to go over 5 points today. So our first point here is how expensive are homes really in Utah? What does that mean with how expensive homes are here in Utah? Utah isn't the inexpensive Western state people may still picture it as being. Unfortunately, Utah has become one of the highest expensive states in the country. It's not the highest, it is one of the highest. But as of May 2026, UtahRealEstate.com, which is the MLS as well for those of us who are realtors here in Utah, showed a statewide median of about $585,000 for single family homes and $408,000 for townhomes and condos kind of put together there. In the Salt Lake County as well, it's also a little bit higher, unfortunately. Quarter 2, the 2026 median was $645,000. So with the entire state, we were bumped down to 585. With just Salt Lake County, it's 645. That's kind of crazy. That's an additional $60,000 right there. Wow. A lot of people don't necessarily know what the median is, so let's look back at what our median is, what that means. It's not the average price, it's the middle, right? So that means there are all the homes that are sold above $585,000, all the homes sold below. That's half and half. And so they're just putting the very middle button, the middle one right there, that's where it is, ding, so you can kind of know what it is. So that doesn't mean you're gonna need to come into Utah with $645,000 to buy a house in Salt Lake County. That means that's what the middle price is. So when you are looking here, maybe we need to look out further or in different places for a home that is less than 645. Or if you want something that's more expensive, hey, we can do that too. The lower you go in price, it's more likely you're going to be compromising something. For example, as we look at that, if we're in the Salt Lake County and we do a lower price on a home, you're probably going to have a smaller garage. You may not have a home with a garage at all. You may not have a home with a whole bunch of land to it. It's a little harder to find homes in Salt Lake County with land, honestly. And so if you're trying to find a place with land, you're going to want to be outside of Salt Lake County. But if you have more money, you're going to get all the amenities you want. That's kind of how life just works, unfortunately. The more money you have, the more things you get that you want. The less money you have, you're going to have to compromise on things, unfortunately. Townhomes and condos are an important part of the affordability conversation today. You have to remember too that it's a little different in life. You know, when our parents in the boomers age were out there buying their first home, it probably was a single family home. And unfortunately, that's not what it's going to be like today. Tobin and I, my real estate partner, we did a podcast it's called the Engineer My Future podcast. And we did this, it was published a little over a month ago, maybe about, I want to say probably the end of June roughly is when it was published. And this is one of the topics we talked about is a first-time home buyer now is probably going to have to compromise on size, and you're not going to be necessarily in a single-family home. You're going to be more in probably a condo, maybe a townhome if you have a little bit more money. And then from there, you're going to have to sell that as you're saving more money to expand into a single-family home down the line. So kind of think about that as you are looking into buying your first home. Utah has gotten expensive, but like I said earlier in this, don't hear that $645,000 and freak out if you're trying to buy a home here in the Salt Lake County. Remember, that's just the median. We can find you homes that are less than that. We can find you homes that are more than that. That's just the median, and so it's just a number to put you there for you to understand what you're going to look into when you're finding a home here in Salt Lake. Now, let's look at this here. Our second point today is why are payments so expensive? The price of the house is only half of the story, right? The cost of borrowing money is the other half. Unfortunately, prices have gone up a lot. And I said in my first episode that I don't think prices are going to be coming down. Prices are honestly in the next 5 years probably going to go up an additional $100,000. So if you're looking to buy a house, now is the time because you can catch that equity. If you wait in 5 years to buy a house, you're going to be shooting yourself in the foot saying, why didn't I buy 5 years ago? Like Connor said, because I could have had an additional $100,000 when I sold this house. Keep that in mind. In Freddie Mac's 30-year national mortgage average, the average is 6.66% on July 30th of this year, 2026. If we compare that to the year 2021, the national average was 2.9%. That's a huge jump. And to make it a little bit easier, while I was cleaning up my desk this week, I found some cool papers that I got in the meeting I talked about in the first episode at Edge. You see this big number right here that's orange? 1.99%. Now, I don't know if this awesome limited time interest rate is still going on, but I'm pretty sure it is. Edge offers a lot of cool things for buyers. I have this paper and I'm going to go over it and I'm going to pop it up here on the screen so you can look at it with me. So let's look at this here. On the left side of the column here, you've got 1.99% on the bottom and 6.99% on the top. Then you have 700,000 to 400,000 on the bottom. That's going to be your home loan amount on the bottom and your mortgage interest rate on the left side. Okay. The national average, like we just said, at the end of July was 6.66%. So that's going to be a little above that line right there of the 6.99%. So the numbers really aren't going to be there, but you can see roughly what it would look like. So let's look at a home that is $600,000 because that's close to that national average here in the Salt Lake County. If we bought a home that's $600,000 at the 6.99% rate, your monthly payment, obviously this is also going to depend on your credit and some other things, but your monthly payment roughly will be just shy of $4,000 at $3,988 a month. And then if you bought a home with Edge and you got this limited time interest rate of 1.99%, instead of $3,988, you would be paying $2,215. That's a pretty big jump. That's almost half, cut in half there with that, right? So let's bump it down to the 400,000. So we're going to be playing with that townhome rule, right? You're up at $2,659 at that 6.99 rate on the right side. And then if you get the Edge 1.99% special, you're paying $1,476. So that's kind of cool. I found this paper last night, I was looking at it and I was like, dang, now I understand why the rates were so great. You know, when I was selling cars and I was selling cars at that, I'm pretty sure my car is still at a 2.1% rate is what it is. It was low, it was awesome. And when I was selling cars is when rates started going up. You know, I remember seeing it being at 3.4 and people were starting to freak out like, oh, rates are going up, oh no. And they came in to buy cars and had to buy a car before the rate kept getting higher. And now car rates are pretty much at the same spot as mortgages where they're in the 6s. So not a whole fun thing there to rent money, right? Rent money from banks because they're charging a whole lot of money for it. So if you look at that, that's a little bit why someone might look at their friend, I guess, and say, wow, they bought a home in 2021 and it was the same price as my home today, but it's bigger and they're paying less money than I am. That's why. It's because they probably have a better interest rate. They probably have that 1.99% or that 2.9%, whatever it was. I think it's 2.9% was what Freddie Mac said was 2021. So they have that low rate, which is amazing. And you're looking at getting that 6.66 today, and so it's going to be a lot more expensive for you to own that home, unfortunately. There are some ways to get around that, such as seller financing, if you've heard of that. That's where you get in there and you essentially take over the homeowner's loan and pay a smaller loan on top of that to compensate for what they've already paid off. But that way you're not having this huge loan of having to pay almost $5,000 a month or $4,000 a month for your home loan, right? You get to pay their mortgage, which is closer to that $2,000 a month and a little bit extra on top of that. So something to think about there with that. However, you know, the mortgage payment people talk about isn't necessarily just the house itself. There are other things to think about. So you're going to have the principal, you're going to have interest, you'll have property tax, homeowners insurance, and sometimes you can also have HOA and mortgage insurance. There's a lot of things that go into that number of $399 or $3,988 or $4,000 just to be safe, right? There's a lot of money that goes into it. It's not just the loan and the money that goes back to the bank. There are several things that go into it. But your down payment also does matter, right? If you have a down payment, that's going to help take things off. So the more money down generally means the less money being borrowed. But, you know, I don't know, depending on your loan, you may not have to put down a ton of money. I just put in an offer on a house out in Tooele for somebody that has 0% down. So they're financing the entire home because they can. That's what the lender was able to give them. And they're a first-time home buyer, so it's kind of cool. So if you're looking for something like that, maybe there's a possibility that you have that down your line. Lenders can do a lot of cool things sometimes. However, telling someone that they need a massive 20% down payment really isn't going to be the whole picture because, like I just said, financing options differ. So I'm not going to come here and tell you you need to have 20% down every single time to buy a home. It can give you a really good option to have better rates if you do that, but you don't necessarily need that. There are definitely ways to get around it. Like I said, you can have a 0% down. You could have a 3% down if you're doing a conventional loan. I think it's FHA actually. I think the 20% down is technically the conventional loan is what it is, and 3% is the FHA. So kind of fun. You can do some different things there. So this is probably the biggest thing that people miss is you aren't just buying a $500,000 home. You are also paying a company to let you borrow hundreds of thousands of dollars to buy that home. And unfortunately right now, money just isn't cheap. I wish I could say it was, but it's not. The houses are expensive and the money you're borrowing is expensive. And that's why Utah housing market is, you know, not necessarily in the best spot right now. So maybe you might have the question now, is renting cheaper? Sometimes yes, but cheaper this month and better for you don't automatically mean the same answer or the same question, right? They are a little bit different. Zillow is currently putting the average rent across property types in Salt Lake City around $16.95 per month. And as a Utah statewide, it's the current one-bedroom average, which is going to be around $12.87. So some things to think about. A renter doesn't have to put down a huge down payment. Typically, you're putting down your first month, maybe your last month's worth of rent, and a security deposit, which is going to be an additional month's rent. So there's about 3 months that you have to put down. So instead of putting 40 grand down, you're putting, maybe $4,000 down to get into that home. And you're also going to be getting the deposit back typically as long as you leave your home in good condition afterwards or whatnot, right? Your landlord also generally is going to handle all of your property repairs, so you don't have to worry about that, which is nice. It can be easier to move if your job or your family situation changes. Depending on what you're comparing, rent may absolutely be lower than today's payment or purchases. But the things that you don't think about it is renters aren't building ownership in this property. Do you understand that? Kind of interesting to think about, right? As a renter, you're paying 100% interest. You don't get any of that money back. You're never going to see it. Homeowners have expenses, renters don't have, but they're also paying a loan on an asset they own, right? So they have that interest they have to pay, but they're paying that down and eventually they will own it. Renters will never, ever own that. So renting may actually be the smartest move for someone who's coming here, if they don't happen to know in Utah where they want to live, because it could be that you move to Utah and you're like, hey, I don't know if I want to live in Salt Lake. Maybe I want to live in Park City or Lehi or all the way up in Ogden or maybe all the way north in Logan. If you don't know where you want to live, renting might be a good option for you to kind of figure out what's the best place here in Utah for you. But if you do know where you want to go, it might not be the best because then you're just losing your money. I'm not going to make this a renting versus buying situation, but renting may actually be the smartest move for one person and buying may be the smartest move for another person. It's really going to be depending on your situation, on what you are doing here in the state of Utah. And in all honesty, I don't think renting is very smart. You are losing all your money. I rented for about 10 years. And I'm never going to see any of that money back. It's a lot of money that you just kind of throw down the drain to somebody else's pocket. Had I been paying a mortgage for 10 years, I would have a third of that house paid off and almost be owning it. I would own a third of the house technically, if you want to look at it that way. But it may be smarter for someone who doesn't know where they want to live. Now, what are some everyday expenses that surprise people? Your mortgage or rent is the biggest number, but it's not your entire cost of living. There are several things to think about on top of the mortgage or rent, right? You've got groceries, you've got transportation, you've got utilities, childcare, healthcare, and if you don't want to be a boring person that sits at home all day, you're going to have to pay for some fun stuff out there too. Groceries are something that you need to have every single day to live, right? You're going to have to buy your food. That is an essential. And an additional thing that's on there is the state of Utah does have a 3% statewide sales tax on qualifying grocery food items. That may be a little bit surprising to somebody who is coming from a state that doesn't have that sales tax, but unfortunately, our government here in Utah does take sales tax on that. Transportation here in Utah, you have to remember that Utah is a very big state, and so you're gonna have to get around, and you're gonna have to pay to get around. You can either use the public transportation, which is gonna be the bus system with UTA, the tracks if you're in Salt Lake County. It's also being expanded down to Utah County, I believe. And you also have the Front Runner, which goes from Utah County all the way up to Weber County in Ogden currently at the moment. They're trying to get a several $billion contract to be able to expand the Front Runner to go even further, but that's gonna be down the line. However, because it's so spread out, honestly, our infrastructure is made for cars, and so you are going to be spending a lot on gas, or you're going to have an electric vehicle and spending it on electricity to charge it. So because it's so spread out, you're going to have to live either relatively close to work, or you're going to have to pay for the gas and a car payment and maintenance and insurance to get you to where you do work. So that's something to think about with there as well. Your utilities are going to change based on the season. So if we're dealing with a very hot summer like we are here in 2026, you're going to be paying a little bit more for electricity for trying to cool down your home. And in the really cold winters with snow, if we happen to have snow, hopefully this year we do, hoping and praying that the El Super Nino brings lots of snow, because we've now had 2 winters over the past 2 years with no snow. We need snow for water next year. If you have a really cold winter, you're going to be paying more for gas to heat your home. So heating and cooling really are the big budget items there. Water typically is not super expensive as far as I can tell. I've never really had to pay a whole ton for that. Childcare has the potential to be a very enormous bill if you happen to have 2 working parents, or you have a single parent family that has to work. Obviously you're going to have to pay for childcare, and childcare is pretty expensive. MIT's Salt Lake area living wage calculations show childcare is one of the most major expenses for working households with children, and I do have an example of that coming at the very end of this video, so stick around to hear that as well. Healthcare is going to include insurance premiums, prescriptions, your co-pays, and deductibles. Those are things people don't necessarily think about when they search the Utah cost of living. So, I mean, that is definitely something that is correlated to the cost of living, as if you're living here in Utah, you're going to have to work with the Utah doctors, you're going to have to work with the Utah hospitals, and you're going to have to pay all those things, which is fun too, because everybody has to deal with that when you go to the doctor to stay healthy, right? Or you could just not be healthy and die, and not fun. Don't do that. We don't want to die. The last thing obviously is the fun option here. Utah has tons of free outdoor recreation, but skiing, snowboarding, boating, youth sports and other Utah lifestyles can get very expensive and very quickly. So if you want to have fun in Utah, you're probably going to be paying money for that too. The sneaky part of cost of living isn't always one giant expense, but sometimes it's 10 smaller expenses that are $100, $200, or maybe $500 a month, because those fun things and those little healthcare items and the groceries all do add up on top of that monthly mortgage or rent that you have to do. Our last topic here we're going to bring up before we do those examples is, does where you live in Utah change that cost? Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, like we talked about there at the very beginning of this, the median average home over Utah was $585,000, but here specifically in Salt Lake County, we're looking at $645,000. Okay, so it does definitely change where we are going. In Utah, there isn't necessarily just one market. It's not one whole big state. It's several little micro markets everywhere. So for example, just some medium sale figures from Zillow as of May 31st of this year. In Cache County, you're looking roughly $460,000 for the median. In Washington County, down by St. George, you're looking at $514,000. Utah County, just south of Salt Lake, is $524,000. And Salt Lake County in that month was $554,000. Even within the Salt Lake County, Zillow does show that the areas are going to be different. So for example, in Sandy, the median sale of the price was $688,000, while out west in Currens, you're looking at $440,000. So really depending on where you're at in the county is going to be also depending on how expensive the price is. So just kind of another example I wanted to bring up now. This is more of a personal sale transaction we've had this year. My sister had a house in Sandy that was roughly 1,800 square feet and about a quarter acre of land. That was, we put on the market for $600,000 and sold it for $600,000 back in April of this year. And a week later, they closed on their brand new house that they started building in November of last year out in Grantsville in Tooele County, which is just west of Salt Lake County. In Grantsville, they sold their house in Sandy for $600,000 and they closed on their new house for $685,000, roughly about that. The new house is about 4,600 square feet, if I remember correctly, and on a half acre of land. Their old house was 1,800 square feet and less than a quarter acre of land. They sold this in Salt Lake County for $600,000. They bought the new one for $685,000. Kind of crazy. That's just going to show you that where you buy your house in Utah does depend on how expensive you pay for it. So, I mean, moving 20 or 30 minutes can completely change what your housing budget buys you. More house, a newer house, a bigger yard. However, that also does come along with a longer commute, more gas, and possibly more time in the car if you're having to move out further away from where everything's going on. Whereas if you are buying something closer to the hub of the state here in Salt Lake, you're looking at probably buying a smaller house with a higher payment, but you also, on the other side, you're gonna have a shorter commute. There's walkability options. You're gonna have more amenities because you're in the hub where everything is located, right? I guess with that, now that I've thrown a lot of these numbers at you over these 5 topics, let's forget about the statistics for a minute here and put this into a real life scenario. Okay, what would it cost for 3 completely different people to live here in Utah? I'm going to create a little person by the name of Jake. Jake is our guy, right? Eventually Jake will get married and have a family, but at the moment, Jake is a single adult. He's going to rent a 1-bedroom, and we're going to see what it looks like for him to live in Utah. So Jake is single. He works full-time, he has a car, and he wants his own home, or his own 1-bedroom apartment somewhere around Salt Lake City. A 1-bedroom apartment in Salt Lake City is currently running around $1,430 a month. Now let's add it to the normal life. MIT's February 2026 Salt Lake County estimate for 1 adult works out to approximately $360 a month for food, $765 for transportation, $244 for medical expenses, $131 for internet and mobile, plus any money for clothing, household needs, and entertainment and other basics. So if we put that all together, we could give Jake a nice round number of $3,700 a month after taxes roughly for living here. Now, that's not Jake living some crazy luxury lifestyle. That's rent, groceries, a car, healthcare, a phone, just a normal life. MIT estimates a single adult in Salt Lake County currently needs about $51,472 per year before taxes, or roughly $24.75 an hour, working full-time to meet the basic needs standards. So, if you're single and moving to Salt Lake, earning $25 an hour doesn't necessarily mean you're rolling in the money. According to MIT's numbers, that's roughly what it takes just to cover a normal basic lifestyle. Now, remember that renting might seem cheaper, but like we said earlier, Jake is paying 100% interest to his landlord. When he's renting, he will never make a return, and he's never going to see any of that money ever again. So, is it really cheaper in the end? I'll leave that up to you. Example 2 we're going to look at now is a young married couple buying a townhome. So let's take Jake. Jake right here, he just met Emily and they got married. They've been living in this apartment that Jake bought for a little while. They decided they're getting tired of renting and they are ready to buy a townhome. We're going to use 460 as our example. That's a closely reported to in June of 2026. That was Salt Lake County townhome median, which is about $463,000 roughly, right? So we'll do $460,000. Let's pretend they were going to put 10% down, which is $46,000, and their mortgage now is $414,000. Okay, so if we use our current year national average, the mortgage rate of 6.69% or 6.66, we'll do 6.9. I think I said 6.6 earlier. We're going to do 6.9 now. 6.69% as a simple benchmark. The principal and interest would be about $26.69 a month. Right, but actual borrower rates can differ, of course, just because you're going to have all the other added expenses in there, so you're aware of that, and also based off of your credit. We're just doing a very rough estimate there. Here's something very important to know for first-time buyers. Their mortgage isn't their entire housing payment, so they're also going to have to put in their property taxes, your homeowner's insurance, your HOA, and your mortgage insurance. So there are a lot of things there that you can think about. And Utah does help primary homeowners a little bit on the property tax side, just so you're aware of this. Qualifying primary residences are taxed on 55% of the market value because of Utah's 45% primary residence exemption. So instead of being taxed on the full price of $460,000, Jake and Emily are only going to be taxed on $207,000 of that primary residence while they are living in that home. So the real housing cost is probably somewhere in the low to mid 3,000s, and let's just call it 3,300 for now. So then you have MIT's basic Salt Lake County expenses for 2 adults. We're going to add roughly $661 a month in food, $885 in transportation, and $486 in healthcare. Plus, you're going to have your phones, your internet, your household expenses, recreation, and also other miscellaneous necessities. So that's going to put our little couple here at $6,500 to $7,000 per month after taxes. That bumped up from our 37, right? So 37 as a single guy, we're now doubling it. We're looking at 65 to 7,000 a month. A little less than doubling it, but to own a townhome and live a relatively normal lifestyle. Notice what's happening here. That $460,000 price tag isn't necessarily the scary part. It's that the house might cost them $3,300 every single month before they've bought groceries, filled up a car, or done anything fun at all. So you got to keep that in mind. Being a homeowner can be a little expensive and a little bit scary there, right? Now, our last example is a young family. Jake and Emily, they now have had 2 kids. They've been married for a couple of years, I guess, and they decided, hey, it's getting a little too small in this townhome. We need to upsize and get out there so the kids can have each of their own rooms and we have a little more space because we don't have anywhere to store anything. So we're hitting our current Salt Lake County median now of $645,000. That was the median single family sale as of Q2 of this year in 2026. So we're gonna do our same experiment of 10% down, which is $64,500. Now their mortgage is gonna be $580,500, and at our 6.69% benchmark, principal and interest alone comes out around $37.42 a month, okay? Add our property taxes, insurance, potential mortgage insurance, and roughly, we're gonna round that up to $4,300 to $4,500 a month. That's before utilities. And then the family life shows up, right? So MIT estimates a Salt Lake County family with 2 adults and 2 children at approximately $1,054 a month for food, $1,283 for transportation, $704 for medical costs, and if both parents work, around $1,752 every single month for childcare. And that's before all the little things anybody with kids knows about. Clothes, school stuff, diapers, depending on age, birthday parties, soccer, swimming, shoes. Sometimes 3 weeks after you buy shoes, you have to buy new shoes because they've already outgrown them. Or if you're like my kids, they wear their shoes and they have holes in them because they drag their feet while riding their cool little Strider bikes. Granted, nothing against Strider bikes. Strider bikes are really, really cool. It's helped all my kids be able to ride normal bikes a lot faster, which is amazing. But man, there's no brakes on those things, so they just tear holes in their shoes. They gotta come up with something to help those shoes out. When we combine MIT's basic needs category with our ownership model, you're getting into the neighborhood of $11,000 a month after taxes. For a 2 working parent family with 2 young children needing childcare. But don't panic. Childcare is doing a lot of that damage to this number. MIT, like I said, is estimating a childcare for $1,750 a month. So if grandma watches the kids or one parent stays home, maybe your kids are older, you're not going to have to worry about those childcare expenses, and suddenly you're closer to $9,000 a month instead of $11,000. So that helps out a little bit, not a whole ton, but every little bit when it comes to that is going to be the biggest thing, right? After looking at these 3 life examples and all these different 5 topics that we've talked about throughout this episode, how much does it really cost to live in Utah in 2026? The answer really is it depends. It depends on your lifestyle, and it depends on where you choose to live, right? But you now have a little bit more in your tool belt on how to figure that out. And if you have additional questions on that, anytime, you are more than welcome to reach out to me. My information is below in this video or in the description of this podcast here on Spotify if you're listening or watching there. Feel free to reach out to me, shoot me an email, shoot me a text, ask me any questions about this, and we can also talk anytime. We can go hit up some Top Golf and play some golf while we talk numbers or things like that to help you be able to afford your own home in 2026 in Utah, because now you know what it costs to live here. If you're specifically wanting to move into Salt Lake, the next episode is going to be pretty important to come back and look for, because we're going to be looking at the best places to live near Salt Lake City and within Salt Lake City, so you can kind of see and apply all this cost of living stuff more every single day. So feel free to come back and listen a little bit more on the next video. And if you have any more questions, like I said, my information is below. or in the descriptions. That way you can be able to reach out to me today or anytime, and we can get you hooked up with a sweet home or property here in Utah and figure out what's going to be the best plan of action for you. Catch you later. See you next time.